The rain in Boston has a way of feeling personal, like it knows exactly where the gaps in your coat are. I stood on the sidewalk of Liberty Avenue, my heels sinking slightly into the damp pavement, staring at the glowing arched windows of the Grand Liberty Heights. Inside, the music was a soft, sophisticated jazz, the kind my mother always insisted made an event look expensive. I could see my father, Richard, through the glass, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, laughing with a senator he'd spent years trying to impress. Beside him stood my mother, Martha, draped in pearls that I knew were fake, though she'd never admit it. They looked like the picture of success. They looked like a family that had it all. But there was a gaping hole in that picture, and that hole was me. Just 2 weeks ago, my mother had sent me a text that simply said, "Don't come, Andrea. We've told everyone you're traveling for work. It's better this way. We don't want to have to explain your situation to our friends." Then she blocked me. Just like that. 50 years of marriage, and they didn't want the daughter who they claimed had failed to ruin the aesthetic of their golden anniversary. They wanted the world to see their golden child son, Caleb, who was currently inside drinking top-shelf bourbon that he couldn't afford, while I was left standing in the cold. But they didn't realize that the situation they were so ashamed of was actually a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. They didn't realize that the very floor they were dancing on belonged to a holding company they couldn't even name. And they certainly didn't realize that the anonymous donor who covered the $50,000 venue fee because my parents were short on funds was the very daughter they had just discarded like yesterday's trash. Tonight, I wasn't just here to watch through a window. I was here to show them exactly who was keeping the lights on. If you've ever been the black sheep of the family, the one who was told they'd never amount to anything while you secretly built a life they could only dream of, then you know exactly why I'm standing here tonight. It's time we stop letting people treat us like an embarrassment while they live off our silence. Before we dive into how I ended up paying for a party I was banned from, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps me share these stories with those who need to hear that their worth isn't defined by their parents' opinions. My name is Andrea. I'm 33 years old, and this is the story of how my parents' 50th anniversary became the night they finally had to look into the eyes of the daughter they tried to erase. To understand why I was standing in the rain outside a party I had funded, you have to understand the house I grew up in. We lived in a leafy, quiet suburb just outside of Boston, the kind of place where the lawns are manicured every Tuesday morning and the gossip is exchanged over stone-ground coffee and organic kale. My parents, Richard and Martha, were the self-appointed king and queen of our cul-de-sac. Richard was a man who believed a crisp suit was a substitute for a personality. And Martha? She treated our family's reputation like a delicate piece of heirloom china. She spent her days chairing the neighborhood beautification committee and her nights worrying about what the neighbors thought of us. In the Evans household, there were two types of people, those who were meant to be seen and those who were meant to serve the image. My older brother Caleb was the masterpiece. He was 3 years older than me, 36 now, and from the moment he could hold a baseball, he was the golden child. My father spent every weekend at Caleb's games, cheering until his face was red, while my mother polished Caleb's trophies until they gleamed on the mantel. Every dinner conversation was a monologue about Caleb's future, the colleges he'd attend, the professional leagues he'd join, the glorious life he was owed. I, on the other hand, was the invisible daughter. I was 33, but to my parents, I was a perpetual project that never quite met specifications. While Caleb was being chauffeured to elite training camps, I was riding the bus to a part-time job at a local diner on Route 9. I remember the first time I got a paycheck. It was only a few $100s, but I was so proud. I brought it home to show Richard, hoping for that nod of approval he gave Caleb every time he hit a home run. He barely looked up from the newspaper. "That's nice, Andrea," he said. "Maybe you can use it to buy your own school clothes this year so your mother and I can focus on Caleb's travel team fees." That was the theme of my life. Caleb's dreams were funded by the family treasury. Mine were something I had to build in the dark. during late-night shifts and early morning study sessions. When it came time for college, my mother sat me down with a look of feigned concern. "Caleb needs to go to a prestigious school to maintain his momentum," she told me, her voice as cold as a Boston winter. "We've put aside everything for his tuition at Boston College. You're sensitive, Andrea. You can handle a community college or a state school. It's better to be a big fish in a small pond anyway." What she didn't tell me was that there was no pond at all for me. I paid for every credit hour, every textbook, and every late-night cup of coffee through student loans and double shifts. I'd come home exhausted, smelling like grease and dish soap, only to find the three of them celebrating Caleb's latest achievement, usually something mediocre like passing a class he'd failed twice before. My father would shake Caleb's hand with a pride that made my throat ache. I was present at those dinners, but I wasn't there. I was just the girl who cleared the plates while they discussed Caleb's star potential. The divide only grew as we entered our 20s. Caleb was given a $40,000 startup gift for a boutique furniture business that he ran into the ground in less than a year. My parents covered his warehouse lease, his supplier debts, and even his personal credit card bills, all while telling the neighbors that Caleb was innovating in a difficult market. Meanwhile, I had graduated with a degree in business and real estate, working 80-hour weeks for a high-end firm in the city. I remember the day I told my mother I had been promoted to a junior associate position at one of the top commercial firms in Boston. I was beaming. I thought, this is it. This is the moment she finally sees me as more than just the backup daughter. Martha sipped her tea, looking right through me. "That's nice, dear," she said before leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper. "But have you heard that Caleb is looking into a new luxury tech venture? He's so ambitious. It's just a shame he hasn't had the right break yet." It wasn't just that they loved him more. It was that they required me to be less so that he could feel like more. My success was a threat to their narrative of the struggling daughter and the prodigy son. They started telling people I worked as a clerical assistant or, eventually, a waitress at a local hotel, simply because they couldn't grasp the concept of commercial asset management. It was easier to pigeonhole me into a role that felt safe, a role that didn't outshine their golden boy. I stopped trying to correct them. I realized that if I told them I was closing million-dollar deals, they wouldn't celebrate. They'd ask why I wasn't giving that money to Caleb. So, I chose silence. I built my empire in the shadows, using the very discipline they had forced upon me by providing nothing. I moved into a modest apartment near the waterfront, drove a sensible car, and wore professional but understated clothes to our family gatherings. At every Thanksgiving, every Easter, and every birthday, the script remained the same. Caleb was the star whose light had temporarily dimmed due to bad luck, and I was the girl who at least has a steady little job. I watched my father pour Caleb top-shelf bourbon while I was tasked with bringing the napkins. I felt like family furniture, something everyone sat on but nobody really looked at. The irony was that while they were polishing Caleb's fading trophies, Caleb was quietly draining their retirement accounts to fund a lifestyle he couldn't sustain. My parents were so blinded by their own reflected glory in him that they didn't see the cracks forming in their own foundation. They didn't see that the prestigious Evans name was being kept afloat by a mountain of debt Caleb had hidden under the rug. And they certainly didn't see me. They didn't see the woman who was quietly buying up the very properties Caleb was being evicted from. They didn't see that the daughter they treated as an embarrassment was the only reason the lights were still on in their world. But as their 50th anniversary approached, their need for perfection and Caleb's need for a stage were about to collide with the reality I had built. They wanted a grand celebration, a display of wealth and family unity that would make them the envy of Boston. And they decided that for that picture to be perfect, I had to be cropped out. While my brother Caleb was busy spending my parents' retirement money on branding for businesses that didn't actually exist, I was learning the language of the city. Boston is a place built on old money and heavy stone, and if you want to make it here, you have to be willing to start in the basement. My basement was a tiny, windowless cubicle at a commercial firm near Faneuil Hall. I was 23, fresh out of a state school they didn't want to pay for, and I was working as a junior analyst. My job was to look at spreadsheets until my eyes burned, finding the tiny cracks in property valuations that everyone else missed. I loved it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being compared to Caleb's athletic potential or my mother's standards. I was being judged by the numbers I produced, and the numbers didn't lie. I remember my first big win. It was a derelict warehouse in South Boston, a place most people thought was only good for scrap metal. But I saw the zoning changes coming. I spent 6 months of my life, Saturdays, Sundays, and 2 a.m. shifts, building a case for why this property was the future of luxury lofts. When the firm closed that deal, the commission check was more than my parents had made in 3 years. I stared at that check in my cramped apartment, the radiator clanking in the background, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in the Evans household. I felt powerful. I could have called Martha and Richard that night. I could have told them, "Look, your disappointing daughter just made a year's salary in a single afternoon." But I didn't. I remembered the way they looked at Caleb when he bought a leased BMW with their money, the pride in their eyes for a lie. I realized that if I told them about my success, they wouldn't see me. They would only see a way to bail Caleb out of his latest disaster. So, I chose silence. I started my own holding company, Avery & Co. Hospitality, named after my grandmother, the only person who ever told me I had a sharp mind. I didn't buy a flashy car. I didn't move into a penthouse. I lived like a ghost. I wore the same 3 professional suits I'd bought on sale, and I kept my mouth shut at every family dinner while Caleb bragged about networking with investors, who were really just his drinking buddies. By the time I hit 28, I had acquired 3 mid-sized boutique hotels and a string of commercial spaces in the Seaport District. I became a master of the LLC. My name wasn't on the front of the buildings. It was buried deep in the filing cabinets of the Secretary of State's office. To the world of Boston real estate, Avery & Co. was a rising titan. To my parents, I was still Andrea, who does something with paperwork at that office downtown. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. The Grand Liberty Heights. It was a legendary venue, a 1920s-era ballroom with gold leaf ceilings and a view of the harbor that could make a grown man weep. It was the place where every elite family in Massachusetts wanted their weddings, their galas, and their anniversaries. But the previous owners had mismanaged the debt. They were drowning. I knew that Richard and Martha had dreamed of hosting their 50th anniversary there for decades. To them, the Liberty Heights was the ultimate symbol of having arrived. I spent 14 months negotiating that acquisition. I fought through board meetings, outbid international developers, and personally inspected every inch of that marble floor. When the deed was finally signed and transferred to Avery & Co., I walked into the empty ballroom alone. I stood on the very stage where my parents hoped to one day stand, and I realized that I didn't just own the building, I owned their dream. But ownership comes with responsibility, and I didn't just buy a trophy, I bought a business. I spent the next 2 years turning the venue into a gold mine. I hired the best caterers, the most disciplined security, and a manager named Claire who was as sharp as a diamond. We were exclusive, we were expensive, and we were booked years in advance. While I was managing a multi-million-dollar asset, I would still go home for Sunday dinners in the suburbs. I'd sit there, passing the mashed potatoes, listening to my mother complain about the rising costs of everything and how Caleb's furniture business was just one big contract away from taking off. "You wouldn't understand the stress of high-level business, Andrea," my father once told me, swirling a glass of wine I had secretly paid for by paying off their property taxes through an anonymous grant. "Your job is safe, and that's fine for someone with your modest ambitions. But Caleb? He's a risk taker. He's like me." I almost laughed into my water. A risk taker? Caleb was a gambler who used other people's chips. I was the one who built the casino. but I kept my face neutral. I played the part. I let them believe I was the invisible daughter because that invisibility was my greatest shield. It allowed me to see them for who they truly were, without the filter of their expectations. And what I saw was a family built on a foundation of sand, worshipping a golden calf that was made of spray-painted plastic. As their 50th anniversary got closer, I watched from the shadows as they struggled to keep up the facade. They wanted the world to see the Evans family at their peak. They wanted the grand Liberty Heights. They just didn't realize that the daughter they were planning to exclude was the only person with the keys to the front door. I was 33 now, at the peak of my career, running an empire that spanned half of the city. I had the money, I had the respect of my peers, and I had the truth. All I was waiting for was the moment they would finally show their hand. And when they did, when that text message arrived telling me I wasn't fancy enough for their perfect night, I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I simply called Claire at the venue and said, "The Evans party on the 15th? Let's make sure everything is perfect. I'll be paying the remaining balance myself, but don't put my name on the receipt. Not yet." If you're enjoying how this story is unfolding and you want to see what happens when the invisible daughter finally steps into the light, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It's stories like this that remind us that the best revenge isn't loud, it's successful. I was ready. The stage was set, the invitations were out, and the Evans family was about to find out that when you try to crop someone out of the picture, you might just find out they're the one holding the camera. The air in the Evans living room always felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the world. It was late September, and the planning for Richard and Martha's 50th anniversary was in full swing. This wasn't just a party, it was their coronation. My mother had vision boards spread across the mahogany coffee table, samples of gold-leafed cardstock, swatches of silk for the drapery, and a list of names that looked more like a census of Boston's high society than a guest list. I sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, feeling like a stranger in my own childhood home. Caleb was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, occasionally chiming in with suggestions for premium spirits that he expected someone else to pay for. "It has to be the Grand Liberty Heights," my mother said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and desperation. "If we don't hold it there, people will talk. They'll think the Evans family is struggling." My father nodded, his face etched with a pride that was starting to look brittle. "We've spent 50 years building our name, Martha. We deserve the best. I've heard the new management there is exclusive. They only take the right kind of clients." I took a deep breath. I knew exactly how exclusive the management was, because I had written the policy myself. I looked at the budget they had scribbled on a notepad. It was a disaster. They were projecting costs that would wipe out what little was left of their savings, and Caleb's investments had already hollowed out their retirement. "Mom, Dad," I said quietly, "the Liberty Heights is incredibly expensive. Maybe I could help? I know a lot about commercial venues and contracts. I could look over the details for you, maybe even help with the costs." The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a lecture. My mother looked at me over her reading glasses, her expression shifting from focus to a pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "That's sweet, Andrea. Truly," she said, though her eyes were cold. "But this is a high-level production. We're inviting the senator, the board of trustees, and our oldest friends. It's a delicate social ecosystem. We need professionals handling this, not someone who, well, someone who does whatever it is you do in that cubicle downtown." Caleb snorted from the sofa. "Yeah, Andrea, stay in your lane. This isn't a company picnic at a bowling alley. This is the big leagues. Let the people who understand luxury handle it." I felt the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out the deed to the Liberty Heights and slam it on the table. I wanted to tell them that the professionals they were so eager to hire were currently waiting for my approval on their holiday bonuses. But I didn't. I had learned a long time ago that in this family, the truth only mattered if it served the image. I just don't want you guys to overextend yourselves, I said, my voice steady. We're fine, Andrea, my father snapped, his patience ending. Focus on your own life. We've got it under control. Caleb is helping us with the strategic side of the event. Strategic side? Caleb couldn't even manage a checkbook, let alone a $50,000 gala. But I nodded and excused myself. As I walked to my car, I felt a heavy knot in my stomach. I knew they were drowning, and I knew they were too proud to let me save them unless they could find a way to make it look like they did it themselves. 3 days later, the block happened. It started with a notification on my phone. You have been removed from the Evans Family Anniversary group chat by Martha Evans. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the notification, waiting for it to be a mistake. Surely she had accidentally hit a button while trying to add a florist or a caterer. I sent a private text to my mother. Hey, I think I got bumped from the group chat. Everything okay? No reply. I waited an hour. 2. I called my father. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Caleb. Blocked. I was a 33-year-old woman, a successful business owner, a person of influence in the city of Boston, and I was being treated like an annoying ghost by the people who gave me life. The final blow came the following Monday. I was at the office, reviewing the quarterly earnings for Avery & Co., when my assistant Claire walked in with a stack of mail. On top was a heavy, cream-colored envelope with gold calligraphy. It was an invitation to the 50th anniversary gala of Richard and Martha Evans. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was a copy sent to the venue owner as part of the event file. The guest list was attached for security clearance. I scrolled through the names. Every cousin was there, every distant aunt, neighbors from 10 years ago, Caleb's college friends, even the dry cleaner my mother liked. But my name was nowhere to be found. Beneath the file, there was a handwritten note from my mother to the venue manager, not knowing that the manager reported directly to me. It read, "Please ensure the guest list is strictly enforced. We have a family member who is unwell and might try to attend to cause a scene. We have told the rest of the family she is traveling for work. We want to maintain a dignified atmosphere." Unwell. Traveling for work. A scene. They weren't just excluding me, they were erasing me. They were creating a narrative where my absence was a result of my own failure or instability, rather than their cruelty. They wanted their perfect night, and they had decided that I was the blemish that needed to be airbrushed out of the family portrait. I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the Boston skyline. For years, I had been the invisible daughter. I had accepted the crumbs of their affection. I had built my life in the shadows so I wouldn't disrupt their golden child narrative. But this was a bridge too far. They were using my silence as a weapon against me, and they were planning to do it in the very building I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. Claire looked at me, sensing the shift in the room. "Is everything okay, Andrea? Do you want me to cancel the booking? We have a waiting list for that date. I could have them out of there in 5 minutes." I looked at the invitation again. I looked at my mother's elegant, looping handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who thought she was in control. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "No, Claire," I said, my voice low and determined. "Don't cancel it. In fact, I want you to give them the diamond package upgrade, free of charge. Tell them it's a loyalty gift from an anonymous donor. I want the best champagne, the finest caviar, and the most expensive floral arrangements in the city." Claire blinked. "But they just insulted you. They've blocked you." "I know," I said, "but I want this party to be the most beautiful, most expensive, most perfect night of their lives. I want them to feel like they are at the very top of the world, because the higher they are, the further they'll have to look down when they realize who's holding the ladder." I wasn't just going to attend their party, I was going to own it. Every toast, every dance, and every forced smile was going to be paid for by the daughter they said wasn't good enough to be in the room. If you've ever reached that breaking point where you realize that taking the high road isn't about being nice, but about having the best view of the fallout, then you know exactly how I felt in that moment. It was time to stop being invisible. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how the diamond package turned into a night of total revelation. Like this video if you've ever had to handle a family block with style. The conflict was no longer about a party, it was about the truth, and the truth was about to walk into the Grand Liberty Heights in a dress that cost more than my father's car. The view from my office on the third floor of the Grand Liberty Heights is one of the best in Boston. From here, the city looks like a glowing circuit board, all pulsing lights and steady movement. But lately, I hadn't been looking at the skyline. I had been looking at a smaller screen on my desk, the one linked to the venue's security and management system. It's a strange thing to own the stage where your own erasure is being planned. 3 weeks before the gala, the financial cracks in my parents' plan began to widen into canyons. My manager, Claire, who is the only person at the venue who knows I'm the owner, walked into my office with a folder and a look of pure exhaustion. "Andrea, we have a problem with the Evans party," she said, dropping the folder onto my mahogany desk. "They've missed the second deposit. Your father, Richard, called today and tried to negotiate the price of the floral arrangements. He was quite vocal about it." I leaned back, tapping my pen against my chin. "Vocal how?" "He told our head florist that her prices were highway robbery and that they shouldn't be charged the premium rate because they are a foundational family of the city," Claire sighed. "And your mother?" "She spent an hour arguing that the Pinot Noir we recommended was too expensive, even though it's the standard for the package they selected." "They're drowning, Andrea. They've overextended themselves trying to look like billionaires on a middle-class retirement budget." I opened the folder. The numbers were stark. They were short $15,000 for the venue rental alone, not to mention the catering and the high-end orchestra Martha had insisted on. I knew exactly where that money had gone. Caleb's social media showed him on a networking trip to Miami, staying at a 5-star resort that I knew he hadn't paid for himself. My parents were literally bankrupting their future to maintain the illusion that their son was a success and their daughter was irrelevant. "What do you want me to do?" Claire asked. "Our policy is strict. If the deposit isn't paid 14 days out, we cancel the booking and retain the initial fee. Should I send the cancellation notice?" I looked out the window at the harbor. I could imagine the fallout. My mother would tell the family that the venue was unprofessional, or that they had decided on a more intimate setting. They would lie to cover the shame, and I would remain the invisible daughter who wasn't invited. "No," I said, my voice cold and focused. "Don't cancel it. In fact, I want you to call my father. Tell him that a charitable corporate sponsor of the venue has chosen their event for a loyalty gift. Tell him that the remaining balance for the venue has been cleared, and because it's their 50th anniversary, we're upgrading them to the Diamond package, free of charge." Claire blinked. "The Diamond package?" "Andrea, that includes the private security detail, the vintage champagne tower, and the premium steak and lobster menu. That's a $30,000 upgrade." "I know," I said. "I want the lobster to be the biggest they've ever seen. I want the steak to be Wagyu. I want the flowers to be imported from Holland. I want them to have the most magnificent, expensive night of their lives. I want every guest in that room to be awestruck by the wealth and prestige of the Evans family." "But they don't even want you there," Claire whispered. "Exactly," I replied. "And I want to make sure the bill they think they're skipping is one they can never actually repay. Charge the entire amount to my personal holding company. But Claire, keep the surveillance cameras in the VIP suite active. I want to see everything." The next few days were a masterclass in human ego. I spent my evenings in the darkened office, watching the live feeds from the ballroom and the planning suite. I watched my parents walk in for their final walkthrough. On the screen, my father looked 10 years younger. The weight of the debt had been lifted off his shoulders by my anonymous gift, and in its place was a bloated sense of self-importance. He walked across the marble floor like he was the one who had polished it. I watched him snap his fingers at one of my junior servers because his water glass wasn't filled fast enough. "Do you know who I am?" I heard his voice crackle through the audio feed. "We are the Evans family. This event is going to be the talk of the town. I expect perfection, not excuses." Then there was Martha. She was worse. She treated Claire like a personal maid, complaining about the shade of the napkins and demanding that the security team keep an eye out for anyone who didn't look like they belonged. "My daughter, Andrea, might try to cause trouble," she told Claire, not knowing she was talking to my right-hand woman. "She's quite jealous of her brother's success. If she shows up, don't even let her pass the velvet ropes. She's not a diamond package kind of person." Watching them was like watching a slow-motion car crash. They were so blinded by the sparkle of the gold-leafed ceiling that they couldn't see the woman who owned the gold. They were using my money to fund the very hands that were pushing me away. I saw Caleb show up for the food tasting. He didn't even pretend to care about the anniversary. He was busy taking photos of the expensive wine bottles to post on his business account, claiming he was scouting locations for a high-end client. He even had the audacity to ask Claire for a finder's fee for bringing his parents' business to the venue. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes, and I felt a strange sense of peace. For years, I had wondered if I was the problem, if maybe I was too sensitive, or if I really was a disappointment. But seeing them in high definition, stripped of the loving parent mask, I realized the truth. They didn't love their children. They loved the reflection of themselves in their children. And because I didn't provide a shiny enough reflection, they had smashed the mirror. Well, the mirror was about to fight back. I spent that final week documenting everything. I kept the receipts, the signed sponsorship forms from my LLC, and the security footage of my father's outbursts. I even kept the original group chat messages where my mother told the family I was unwell. Everything was in place. The Wagyu was ordered. The lobster was being flown in. The vintage 1996 champagne was chilling. It was going to be a perfect night. The kind of night people in Boston talk about for a decade. Before we get to the actual night of the gala, and trust me, the look on my brother's face when he realizes who's actually paying for his drink is something you don't want to miss. Take a second to subscribe to the channel. Have you ever been the person secretly holding everything together while the people around you take all the credit? Tell me your story in the comments. I read them all, and it reminds me that none of us are truly as invisible as they want us to feel. The gala was 48 hours away. My parents were busy calling the local paper to make sure a society reporter would be there. They wanted the world to see the Evans family at the height of their power. They got their wish, but the power wasn't theirs. It was mine, and I was finally ready to sign my name to the check. The night of the 50th anniversary gala arrived with the kind of crisp, biting wind that makes the harbor water look like hammered silver. I stood in the back seat of a black sedan, smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown, and looked up at the facade of the Grand Liberty Heights. It was glowing. Every arched window was illuminated, casting long golden rectangles onto the pavement. I had spent millions to make this building a masterpiece, but tonight, it looked like a gilded cage for the people inside. I stepped out of the car. The valet didn't recognize me as the owner. I liked it that way. I walked toward the heavy brass doors, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the marble stairs. At the entrance, 2 security guards in sharp suits stood behind a velvet rope. One held a tablet with the guest list, the list that I knew didn't have my name on it. "Name, please?" the guard asked, his voice professional and cold. "Andrea Evans," I said. I didn't whisper it. I didn't say it with hesitation. He scrolled through the tablet, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see an Andrea Evans here." "Are you sure you're at the right venue?" "I'm positive," I replied. "Check the VIP oversight list." Before he could respond, the door swung open and my father, Richard, stepped out. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, looking every bit the patriarch he imagined himself to be. He was laughing at something a man in a gray suit was saying, probably one of his old business associates. Then, his eyes landed on me. The laughter didn't just stop, it died. His face went from a celebratory flush to a pale, ghostly gray. "Andrea?" he hissed, stepping toward me and grabbing my arm to pull me away from the entrance. "What are you doing here? We told you this wasn't the place for you tonight." "It's a public event, Dad," I said, pulling my arm back. "And it's your 50th. I thought I'd come by and see how my gift was being put to use." "Gift?" he scoffed, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "You didn't give us anything but a headache. Now listen to me. I have the senator inside. I have the board of the country club. If you walk in there looking like this, trying to cause a scene, I will have you escorted out. We told everyone you were in Seattle on a business trip. Don't make us look like liars." "You already look like liars, Richard," I said, my voice rising just enough to catch the attention of the couple entering behind me. "The only question is how long you can keep it up." He turned to the guard. "She's not on the list. Keep her out." The guard looked at me, then at my father, clearly uncomfortable. But before he could move, a voice cut through the tension like a diamond on glass. "Actually, he doesn't have the authority to do that." It was Claire. She walked out of the lobby, her clipboard held tight to her chest, her expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know her. She looked at the guard and gave a sharp nod. "Miss Evans is permitted entry. In fact, she is the guest of honor's daughter. Let her through." My father looked at Claire, confused. "Do you know who I am? I am the client. I am paying for this room." Claire didn't blink. "Sir, I suggest you go back to your guests. We will handle the entrance protocols." I walked past him, the smell of his expensive cologne and desperation lingering in the air. As I entered the ballroom, the sheer scale of the diamond package hit me. The ceiling was draped in thousands of white orchids. A 10-tier champagne tower sat in the center of the room, the crystal glasses shimmering under the chandeliers. The air smelled of Wagyu beef and vintage wine. It was a masterpiece of excess. In the center of the room, my mother, Martha, was holding court. She was surrounded by a circle of women in sequins and pearls, her voice trilling with that fake high society laugh. Caleb was beside her, looking bored, nursing a glass of bourbon that he was probably telling everyone was a rare find. When Martha saw me, she didn't even try to hide her disdain. She marched over, her silk dress rustling aggressively. "Andrea, I cannot believe you. We sent you that text for a reason. You are going to ruin the most important night of our lives. Look at these people. Do you think they want to hear about your struggles? Do you think they care about your little job?" "I'm not here to talk about my job, Mom," I said, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing server. "I'm here to enjoy the party. After all, the diamond package is quite impressive, isn't it? The Wagyu, the orchids. The anonymous sponsor really went all out." Martha's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about the sponsor?" "I know a lot of things," I said. "Like how you told everyone I was unwell so they wouldn't ask why I wasn't here. Or how Caleb here spent your last $5,000 on a flight to Miami while you were crying to the venue manager about the deposit." Caleb bristled. "Watch your mouth, Andrea. You're just jealous because you'll never be part of a night like this." "A night like this?" I laughed. "Caleb, you're drinking my bourbon." The music suddenly swelled, and my father walked to the small stage at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone, and the room went silent. I stood at the back, Claire standing quietly in the shadows beside me. "Friends, family, honored guests," Richard began, his voice booming with forced confidence. 50 years is a long time. It's a lifetime of building a legacy. Martha and I have always believed that the Evans name stands for excellence. We've had our challenges, but tonight, seeing our son Caleb following in my footsteps and seeing all of you here in this magnificent venue, it proves that hard work pays off." A smattering of applause broke out. "And I want to thank our anonymous sponsor," Richard continued, who recognized the importance of this milestone and ensured that we had the setting we deserved. It's a testament to the respect the Evans family commands in this city. I felt a surge of cold, sharp clarity. This was it. The moment they claimed my hard work as their own legacy. I looked at Claire and nodded. She stepped forward, but I stopped her. This was my stage. I started walking toward the front. The crowd parted as I moved, the blue silk of my dress catching the light. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of the stage, looking up at my father. "That's a beautiful speech, Dad," I said. The microphone caught my voice, and it echoed through the high ceilings. The room went deathly quiet. I could see the senator's wife whispering to the person next to her. "Andrea, sit down," Martha hissed from the front row, her face turning a deep, angry red. "Security! Get her out of here!" 2 guards started toward me, but Claire stepped into their path, her hand raised. They stopped instantly. "Richard," I said, looking him in the eye, "you talk about legacy, you talk about hard work. But you didn't tell them the truth. You didn't tell them that you were $15,000 short on the deposit for this room. You didn't tell them that you blocked your own daughter because she wasn't fancy enough for your elite friends." "You're lying!" Martha screamed, standing up. "She's unstable! She's trying to embarrass us!" "Am I?" I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the deed to the building and the final payment receipt. I didn't hand them to her. I handed them to the man in the front row, the president of the local historical society, a man my father had been trying to impress for years. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "would you mind reading the managing member line on that deed? And perhaps the signature on the Diamond Package sponsorship form?" The man adjusted his glasses, looking at the papers. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like it was pressing against the walls. "The owner of the Grand Liberty Heights is Avery & Co. Hospitality," Mr. Sterling read, his voice clear and confused. "And the managing member is Andrea M. Evans. The sponsorship for tonight's event was paid in full by the same entity." A collective gasp went through the room. I looked at my mother. Her mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. I looked at Caleb, who had gone as white as the orchids on the tables. My father was clutching the microphone stand so hard his knuckles were white. "You see?" I addressed the room, my voice steady and cold. "My parents wanted a perfect night. They wanted to show off their success. But the success they are standing on belongs to the daughter they told the world was a waitress and an embarrassment. I paid for the steak you're eating. I paid for the champagne in your glasses. And I paid for the floor they are standing on because they couldn't afford to be the people they pretend to be." I looked up at Richard. "The anonymous sponsor isn't a fan of your legacy, Dad. It's the daughter you tried to erase. And as the owner of this building, I have one thing to say to the Evans family." I turned to Claire. "Claire, the party is over. Please ensure the bar is closed and the guests are escorted out. My parents can stay for 10 minutes to pack their things. After that, they are no longer welcome on my property." The room erupted. Whispers, shouts, the sound of chairs scraping across the marble. My parents were frozen on the stage, stripped bare in front of every person they had ever lied to. They had wanted the world to see them at their peak, and I had given them exactly what they asked for, a peak with a very, very long way to fall. Before we see how they tried to crawl back, and trust me, the excuses they made are almost as pathetic as their lies, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Have you ever had to expose a lie to protect your own truth? Tell me in the comments. We're reaching the end of Andrea's story, and you won't believe the final conversation. I walked out of the ballroom, the sound of my own heels the only thing I cared to hear. The invisible daughter had just become the only person in the room that anyone was ever going to remember. The silence that followed my departure from the ballroom was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I didn't stay to watch them scramble. I didn't stay to hear my mother's frantic excuses or see my father try to shake hands with guests who were already heading for the coat check. I walked out of the heavy brass doors of the Grand Liberty Heights and felt the cool Boston night air hit my face like a benediction. I sat on a stone bench in the park across the street, watching the lights of my building. For years, I had thought that the only way to be happy was to be seen by them, to finally get that nod of approval from Richard or a genuine smile from Martha. But as I watched the silhouettes of people leaving the party, I realized that their approval was a currency that had no value in the world I had built. They had spent 30 years trying to make me feel small, but all they had succeeded in doing was making me strong enough to walk away. Claire came out a few minutes later, holding my coat. She sat beside me in silence for a moment before speaking. "They're still inside," she said quietly. "Caleb is trying to argue that the deed must be a mistake. Your father is sitting at a table alone, staring at the floor. Your mother, she's trying to tell the remaining guests that you're just going through a phase." I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "Let them have the night, Claire. They wanted a perfect anniversary and they got it. They got the food, the wine, and the venue. They just lost the daughter who made it possible." "What do you want to do about the accounts?" she asked. "Close them," I said firmly. "I've paid the balance for tonight, but the monthly allowance I've been secretly funneling to their mortgage through the trust? Cut it off. The credit card Caleb uses that's linked to my subsidiary? Cancel it tonight. I'm not going to sue them for the money they've already taken, but I am done being the ghost that keeps their house standing." In the weeks that followed, the fallout was exactly what you'd expect. My phone was flooded with messages. First, they were angry, calling me ungrateful and cruel. Then, when the bills started bouncing and Caleb's creditors finally caught up with him, the messages turned to desperate pleas. My mother sent a long, tear-filled email about family loyalty. I didn't reply. I didn't block them this time. I simply didn't care enough to engage. I had finally realized that loyalty is a two-way street, and for 30 years, I had been the only one driving. Caleb's luxury tech venture collapsed within a month without my parents and my financial backing. My parents had to sell the big house in the suburbs and move into a modest condo. It wasn't a tragedy. It was just reality finally catching up with the image they had tried so hard to maintain. As for me, I went back to work. I continued to build Avery & Co. Hospitality, but I did it with a new sense of freedom. I no longer wore the modest suits to hide my success. I bought a home that I loved, filled it with people who actually saw me, and I stopped waiting for a phone call that was never going to be what I needed it to be. I learned that the golden child narrative is a trap for everyone involved. It trapped Caleb in a life of lies, and it trapped my parents in a world of shallow appearances. But it gave me the greatest gift of all, the necessity of building my own worth. If you're watching this and you're the one who's been pushed into the shadows, the one who's been told you're not enough, I want you to remember one thing. The people who try to crop you out of the story are usually the ones who can't survive without you. You don't need to yell to be heard, and you don't need to beg to be seen. Just build your empire in silence, and let the truth be your loudest witness. Thank you for staying with me through Andrea's journey. If this story reminded you that your boundaries are your power, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this video. Your support helps me keep telling the stories of people who finally stood their ground. My name is Andrea, I am 33 years old, and I am finally the owner of my own life.